Great. Thanks. As Mike said, welcome everyone to Anne Arundel County's Green Infrastructure Master Plan Forum. My name is Carrie and I'm part of the Long Range Planning Division. And as we get started here, I just want to offer a few reminders to help this forum tonight go smoothly. This is a Zoom webinar, so this means that you can see the panelists and the slides, but we can't see you. Tonight's forum is being recorded, as Mike said, and we'll be posting the recording to our website tomorrow. That website is aacounty.org/green infrastructure, and we'll provide it later, so don't worry if you didn't write it down. We invite you to use the Q&A button tonight to pose questions throughout the session. We're tracking those questions, and at the conclusion of our presentation this evening, we have some panelists lined up to respond to as many of those questions as possible. You can go ahead, Mike. And speaking of our panelists, these are them. I'd like to introduce them briefly. You'll hear from some of these folks later in just a few minutes as they lead portions of the presentation. But with us tonight to answer questions, we have Cindy Carrier from the Office of Planning and Zoning, Matt Johnston, the Environmental Policy Director for the county. Sarah Niebel is joining us from the Scenic Rivers Land Trust. We have Erica Matthews from the Department of Recreation and Parks, Eric Michelson from the Bureau of Watershed Protection, and my colleague Mike Stringer from the Office of Planning and Zoning. This is our run of show for the evening. You can see that we are partway through our first section, the welcome. In just a few minutes, we'll do a poll, and we'll do some polls throughout the presentation just to lighten up and see how everybody's doing. My colleague Mike is going to walk us through an overview of green infrastructure and the planning process. Then we'll hear from our community partner, Sarah Niebel, and from Matt Johnston later about the benefits of green infrastructure and the additional countywide tools that we have at our disposal to support the environment. And then finally, we'll spend some time answering your questions and reviewing next steps for participation in this master plan. So please remember to use the Q&A button to pose those questions. We'll track them and get to as many as possible. Now we can go on ahead with the first community polling question. This is hopefully an easy one for you guys. What is green infrastructure?
And you should see a button pop up on your screen that allows you to respond to the options there. It looks like everyone's getting it. How to use it. All right, looks like almost everybody is in. And then our top two vote getters there are that it's about nature-based stormwater management or just a fancy word for natural lands. And we'll get into that in just a moment, but you guys hit the nail on the head there. No one fell for our trick answers. And so with that introduction, let me take this on and talk a little about this. Again, I'm Michael Stringer, and I am a senior planner with the Office of Planning and Zoning. And actually, just a moment, I forgot earlier to turn on the live transcript, so that way we can get closed captioning here. Okay, so that should start now. So what is green infrastructure? Why does the county plan for it? Why should it matter to us? Green infrastructure, as you all pointed out in the answer to the question, has two meanings in the environmental community now. It has started with thinking about our natural lands and how we preserve and protect them. And in Anne Arundel County, a big milestone for that was in 2002 when we adopted the county's Greenways plan. That looking at the name of list of attendees, I think a lot of you are very familiar with that, and we're probably even involved in that process. And then green infrastructure has also been more recently applied into thinking about stormwater management. And this is an area that we'll touch upon later in the presentation, and are thinking about how best to kind of address the evolution of this term while we continue to evolve our programs in Anne Arundel County. So thinking about back to that 2002 Greenways plan, that set a context and a policy framework for the county for protecting the largest natural areas and interconnecting them, especially with a focus on our river corridors. And in 2010, the Office of Planning and Zoning and Department of Recreation and Parks prepared an implementation report that was a status update on progress along the way of implementing that plan. That also established some new goals and ideas. And in 2018, the departments of, again, Recreation and Parks and Planning and Zoning worked together to begin to update the Greenways plan. And that plan was, there were community meetings held back in 2017 that some of you may have attended. There was a lot of analysis done, and it was brought all the way up almost to a draft plan. But then the time cycle came up for updating the general development plan. So that plan was put on pause as all hands were on deck for the general development plan. And now that that plan is in front of council for review and hopefully will be adopted in their council meeting on Monday, we've begun to refocus on this green infrastructure plan. And our goal is to complete that update this year. And of course, when we went through that general development plan process over the last 3 years or so, we heard a lot of community comment about environmental protection, the need to restore and protect our natural environment. And so this builds on that, as well as policies that are in the general development plan that directly support the update of the Greenways plan. So the purpose of the green infrastructure plan aligns just like with the Greenways plan, that we're looking at protecting the largest contiguous natural areas in the county and those connections between them. And the reason that we want to do this is because of the multiple benefits it provides the public, right? There's environmental benefits to water quality, air quality, wildlife habitat, also social benefits for recreation, for quality of life, for transportation even, and then economic benefits supporting our agricultural and working forests, as well as promoting tourism, a lot of benefits associated with protecting these natural areas. And the county uses this plan primarily as a guide and prioritization for its efforts for land and easement acquisition. So when the Department of Recreation and Parks goes out to acquire parklands, it looks at these areas as priorities. Also, when the Agricultural and Woodland Program is looking at conservation easements on ag lands, they look at this for priorities. And our partners, like the Scenic River Land Trust, as they're working with private landowners on conservation easements, also look to this as a space of shared priorities. The plan is not a regulatory plan. There's no additional regulations on development that come through this, but we do reference currently the 2002 Greenways plan when we do development review. We identify whether properties are within the Greenway, and then we work collaboratively with the applicant to try to avoid and minimize impacts to that. So we use it and reference it, but there's no strict regulatory requirements. Now, our planning process. We have begun, as I mentioned, reinitiating this planning process at the beginning of the year. We began with doing additional research, kind of getting all of our data together and thinking about how best to engage the community, building on the efforts of the general development plan, as well as the previous work on the green infrastructure plan. And then the last couple of months, we've been focused on doing the spatial analysis, make sure that we're updating our data. And this is a big reason for doing this update, is just that we have a lot more sophisticated tools, robust and updated data now than we did back in the early 2000s. You can see here that we've done a series of engagement activities. We've been conducted a couple meetings so far with the Citizens Environmental Commission, been presenting to other boards and commissions around the county. We've also held 2 workshops with practitioners, those partners in the nonprofit space, as well as federal and state agencies who are involved in land conservation, natural land management, to help get the advice of those experts on how best to frame this plan. You know, certainly the county is not the only party that's active in land conservation. This work has been going on for decades. So we're looking for what lessons can we learn? How do we improve and enhance this program into the future? Tonight's a big milestone with this public forum. We have some good information to share with you tonight. And there'll be many more opportunities for sharing along the way as we go through and actually have draft materials like a draft map for you to be able to review online, as well as a draft of the plan that will go out in public review this summer. And eventually, of course, this will go through the formal review process with the Planning Advisory Board, and then ultimately County Council that has the authority to adopt the plan. So thinking about the public engagement so far, we've had a survey on our website that we've been posting on social media and emailing you about, and I think a lot of you have probably responded to this. I want to share some of the initial input that we've gotten from this survey. This question here asks about the level of public support for using public funds to protect more land in the green infrastructure network. And we've had about 163 respondents as of today, an overwhelming level of support, above 90%, saying they strongly support or support using public funds to protect more of the network. And interestingly, concurrently, right now, the Department of Recreation and Parks is updating their big master plan, which is the Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan. They also have a survey that's available through May 15, and they've been able to get much broader distribution of that. They have over 2,500 respondents to that now. And they are showing a similar question to this, very high levels of public support for investment in public land acquisition for natural areas and open space. Another important question that we asked in our survey was, what do folks think about the type of lands that we should be acquiring? When you talk to conservation biologists, and a lot of the principles behind something like the Green Infrastructure Plan focuses on protecting those large natural areas. And that's really important for wildlife diversity, for habitat quality, for reducing fragmentation, as well as decreasing the prevalence and susceptibility of non-native invasive species like ivy and Japanese barberry and kudzu getting into these spaces. But we're hearing from pretty loud and clear from the public that's responded to the survey so far that it's important both to protect those large areas and smaller ones. And this aligns a lot with the quality of life concerns we've heard through the general development plan process too, that there's a lot of interest in the county of protecting those small areas that are right near our neighborhoods. That while people acknowledge that, yes, it's very important to protect the big natural areas like Jug Bay and Bacon Ridge, they also want to see lands that are close to their neighborhoods, close to where they live, that are protected. And some direct quotes, some of the things that we've heard through the open public comment piece of the online survey. A lot of folks expressing their support for protecting open space and making sure that's a priority for the county. And also acknowledgement that this needs to be balanced with our plans for development to make sure that we maintain space and for new housing and development. And this is certainly a tension that we heard throughout the general development plan process as well, right? And an important emphasis, like I mentioned in a few comments, that's a really strong point in the general development plan is about the need for the county to shift to redevelopment, to limit the times that we are cutting down forests or plowing under fields for new subdivisions and focusing our future development as redevelopment of those already developed spaces that are maybe currently underutilized or vacant. So just a little snapshot of some of the sentiment that we're hearing back from the survey and from the community. So getting back to what is green infrastructure? What do we include in this plan? And the definition aligns with what was in the 2002 Greenways plan and expands it a little bit. We're still focused on this idea of the largest natural areas, and following the model of the state's green infrastructure assessment and the principles behind green infrastructure planning that are actually applied nationally, we maintain this idea of building the network around hubs, those areas that are 250 acres and greater, and connecting those with corridors that are 200 feet wide at least. And that is for, as I mentioned before, the wildlife habitat and diversity, ecosystem function at those large scales. And those corridors are really important for migration of wildlife between spaces. Also creates great opportunities for trails and humans to be able to move between those spaces as well as we protect those corridors. This aligns really well with our principles around protecting streams as well through our water quality and stream restoration projects. We've also included, as we've done the analysis this year, an in-depth look at tree canopy analysis to make sure that we're looking at those patches of forest that are 75 acres or larger to make sure that this plan is consistent with the policies that are in the updated forest conservation ordinance that was passed in 2019. So how do we map this? How do we identify it? We started with the 2002 Greenways Map that's shown here on the screen. And you can see that this includes a lot of the largest parks that you'll recognize in the county, like over in the western part of the county, the Patuxent Refuge, going down the Patuxent River down to Jug Bay, includes Severn Run, areas around Bacon Ridge, areas around Lakeshore and up in Fort Smallwood, Downs Park. And as we went to update this, as you can see, the lines here are kind of wavy. And that speaks a lot to the technology, the level of detail that we could conduct in this analysis in 2002. As we went to update it, we were able to look at more refined data. We looked at things like aerial photos, looked at land cover, land use. We also looked at data from the state. The Department of Natural Resources has conducted a lot of studies and models to identify priority areas for wildlife habitat and land conservation. So we've incorporated those, as well as the Department of Natural Resources has also prepared analysis of coastal resiliency, looking at habitats that are at or areas that are at risk from sea level rise and storm surge, and looking at opportunities for natural resource lands to actually help mitigate and protect those areas. So we've incorporated that climate resiliency, that sea level rise lens into this as well. I mentioned the tree canopy analysis that we conducted, as well as looking at updates in easements. We've got, of course, the county's Ag and Woodland Preservation Program works on a voluntary basis with landowners to put lands in a conservation easement that removes the development rights and allows them to continue to farm or work the forests. And our partners like the Scenic River Land Trust and other land trusts in the county like the Crownsville Conservancy and Magathie River Association, Magathie River Land Trust, are also working with private landowners on a voluntary basis to put land into conservation easements. And then through our development review process as well, with the Forest Conservation Ordinance, we require properties to put on forest conservation easements when they meet those thresholds, as well as requirements for open space set-asides and floodplain dedications. So updating all that information from 2002 to current day to make sure we're documenting that. So there's a lot of areas to add with that data, also areas to remove and refine based on development that's occurred since 2002. So again, looking at aerial photos, looking at recorded plats and subdivisions to see where there's areas that have been developed or in permit in the construction process. So as we get into that, we include these major types of property that get included if they meet that size criteria in that connectivity. And this includes our parks and natural areas, those areas protected by conservation easements, those regulated natural features like streams, wetlands, and floodplains, agricultural lands, as well as our regional trails. And this Venn diagram here is showing that the Green Infrastructure Network includes portions of those, but not all of them. So for example, not every park in the county is included in the network. It's included if it meets that size criteria or it's connected to that network. So what this looks like for the map, which is in progress and being updated, is that, again, we see that expansion of the 2002 greenways. You can see those major park areas, like I mentioned before, like the Patuxent Refuge, Jug Bay, Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, Bacon Ridge, Severn Run, Downs, and Fort Smallwood. And you see connections along our stream corridors, like the Patapsco River. And you can see that the lines here become looking more and more linear because they're actually getting parcel based. The staff at the Planning and Zoning have really looked in detail at specific properties to understand those development patterns, what's been permitted, what's been protected. You can also see that the area in South County has expanded a fair bit from where it was in 2002. And that was looking, again, more closely at those corridors and greenways from 2002 and seeing that there were adjacent lands protected underneath agricultural easements, or there were woodlots in some of those forest areas that, or some of those agricultural areas that provided quality habitat. So we've incorporated those as well. You'll see the map has two color codes. It's got dark green, which indicates protected, and light green, which indicates unprotected. And that protected status means that it's either in public ownership from federal, state, or county government, or there's a conservation easement on it. and that includes those different types of conservation easements, from forest conservation to the private conservation easements, as well as those things like floodplain dedications and open space set-asides. It also includes land that's zoned open space. And then if it's unprotected, it means that those things do not apply. Private ownership without those special protections. So some overall numbers on this. The network measures about 113,000 acres, and that accounts for about 30% of the county. And about 65% of it is currently protected. And looking back at the progress we've made on implementing the Greenways plan, since 2002, the county has acquired about 3,500 acres of property within the Greenways network. That's not countywide, that's just within the Greenways. And similarly for agricultural easements, we've completed about protected about 3,900 acres of land with that. And then partners in the land trust community, the nonprofits, have also protected an additional about 1,900 acres. Again, these are statistics from 2002 through the end of 2020. So that adds up to about 9,300 acres of land that's been protected over that period. So there's been a lot of progress made to date and a lot more to go with 65% of that network protected. You can look at that as we've come a long way, but also there's a lot more to go. And so as we talk about why we would do this and why we would try to make such a large effort to protect this kind of land, I want to pass it on to Sarah Niebel from the St. River Land Trust to talk about some of the benefits of natural land protection.
Yeah, well, good evening, everyone. So as Michael said, I'm Sarah Niebel, the Executive Director of Scenic Rivers Land Trust. And for those of you not familiar, we are a 501c3 nonprofit that is dedicated to protecting the natural and scenic lands of Anne Arundel County. And over the last 32 years of our existence, we've protected over 3,000 acres using 70 conservation easements. So it's a little slice, but it's a lot when you start looking at it individually. So, if you're not familiar with conservation easements, I'll get into that in just a couple slides. But, I just wanted to first go into the general benefits of green infrastructure, land conservation at large. We are, it can be divided up into a couple sections. One of them is environmental benefits. So forests and wetlands provide clean air and clean water. I think everyone can agree that's important to, the living world in general. And when you have forests and wetlands and meadows, you also have wildlife habitat. And when you also have clean water, you have a healthy Chesapeake Bay, which is, of course, incredibly important to Maryland. So trying to keep all these habitats connected can, as Michael said earlier, help with wildlife migration and also adaptation to climate change as we go through that. So next slide, please. So all of that ties into the economy. So, we have tourism, we get a lot of boating recreation and tourism for the Chesapeake Bay. If we don't have a healthy Chesapeake Bay, we don't have, where not as many people are swimming, not as many people are wanting to get out on their boats, and not as many people come here and spend their money in Annapolis and other areas. And then, having these protected lands, protecting working forests, helps protect the lumber industry. Paper is still really important, even though we're continuing to move to a digital world. And also, not only working forests, but also generating food. We all still need food. Most of us don't grow it ourselves, so we need those working lands close to us, especially as we noticed last year during the pandemic. Food supply chains can get a little delicate at times, so having local food close to us can help ensure food security in the future. And and not only on the land, but also in fishing industries, the fishing and oysters and everything that the Chesapeake Bay can provide also is protected by what happens on the land. Whatever happens on the land affects the water. So, all of those can add up to a resilient economy, and also just resiliency in general as we approach climate change and extreme weathers and storms and all of that. Wetlands can help us with that. Forests can help us with that. So not only, this goes into the slide too. So there's also the social aspect, which ties together the two slides we talked about before. There's recreation, getting out on, I think probably everyone enjoyed our public parks a little more last year during the pandemic when, being inside was so dangerous. And not only can it provide just an excuse to get out of your house, but it can, the trails that Anne Arundel County is building can also provide a different form of transportation for bikes. As Michael mentioned earlier, it can help people stay active and healthy. It can, provide some mental relief as well from the stress of our everyday life. And, just being able to have a diverse array of land uses in a small area where you can go to your from your house to the store to your local farm to buy some food, to then to your public park in the afternoon, and then head home all in one day. That's a great community, or it's a part of a great community. So working land conservation and the green infrastructure is important to be able to encompass all of this and achieve all of this in our county. So next slide, please, Michael. And conservation easements can be a really important aspect of that. So not only do you have your parks and your public owned property, but conservation easements can help private landowners protect their property. And for those of you who don't know, a conservation easement is a legal agreement between a landowner and a land trust or a government agency. And it's a real estate transaction. It's a deed recorded in land records, and it restricts the uses and the structures allowed on a property to protect those forests and farms and historical areas and streams and wetlands. So you can't build as many houses, you can't clear cut your forest. And that is basically the nuts and bolts of an easement. An easement is, it doesn't transfer ownership. We don't own 3,000 acres. We just have a stake at the management table for those 3,000 acres. And for the count, other land trusts have even more acreage. And so the landowner owns the land at the end of the day. They can enjoy it and manage it and sell it to whomever they want, or pass it on to whoever they like. So that's a huge perk of conservation easements is the government doesn't have to own everything to conserve it. We can work with private landowners and the landowner can still own it. And the other benefits of that is the landowner can leave a legacy. They can protect their their farm that has been in their family for 5 generations. They can take comfort in knowing that it will still be there for 10 more generations. And the landowner who bought a forest 30 years ago and has fallen in love with it and finds peace in it every day can take comfort in the fact that that forest is going to be there for another 100+ years, climate change willing. And we have all these financial benefits that can help landowners and land trusts and the government be able to do these easements. So an easement has value attached to it when you retire development rights in conservation easements, as in if you could build 10 houses and we restrict the land to only be able to build maybe 1 house, then the value of those 9 houses that you can no longer build, you could have built but no longer can, is considered the value of a conservation easement. And so the landowner can donate a conservation easement and the value along with it, because we are a 501c3 nonprofit, or, to the government. Or we can purchase a conservation easement. So we can give the landowner cash and compensate them for their loss. A great option that I use a lot and landowners enjoy a lot is what's called a bargain purchase, where it's a partial donation and a partial purchase. So there's some cash on the table and they also get some tax incentives. And there's a lot of funding programs to be able to do that. We used the story behind this picture. Normally landowners don't want us to show their faces, but this landowner was perfectly happy to have her picture taken. She inherited a property from her dance partner, which was very entertaining. But anyway, her son ended up cleaning up the hundreds of tires that were on the property, cleaning up thousands of pounds of scrap metal from the old farming equipment, and then came to us and wanted to protect the 80 acres that they had. And so we used a county forest protection grant program through the Chesapeake Bay Trust and was able to bargain purchase the conservation easement and, protect almost 70 acres of forest and plant 5 acres of trees and protect another, 8 acres of working farmland. So it was just a wonderful project to be involved with. That's, there's a lot of perks to conservation easements, and they're a huge part of the land conservation world, not only in Anne Arundel County, but nationwide. So I think that's it, Michael.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. So make sure that we still have folks paying attention out there. We have another poll I want to ask you about. Hard one to answer, I know, but thinking about those different types of benefits, the environmental, economic, and social, which one of those is most important to you personally? Or is it the combination of all of them that is the most valuable to you? Looks like folks are getting the hang of the polling here. We're getting results in really quickly. We'll give you another few seconds, then we'll share the results. Okay, so we're a pretty mixed crowd. That we've got a lot of folks who are prioritizing the environmental benefit, and a lot of us who are focused on the combination, the fact that we get multiple benefits out of this is a good public policy. So, thank you very much for sharing that. And now I'd like to ask Matt Johnston to talk to us a bit about other tools that the county has. The Green Infrastructure Program or Green Infrastructure Plan is an important piece, but just one piece of many ways that the county is working to protect the environment. So Matt.
Sure, thank you so much, Michael. So good evening, everybody. Matt Johnston here, Environmental Policy Director. I think that Michael gave me like 8 minutes. There's no way he's going to get me to stop talking about trees in 8 minutes. So we'll see how I do, though. But before I do, I just wanted to thank this entire team. Those of you who are watching tonight don't see all the work behind the scenes, but this whole team from planning and zoning just went through a marathon planning exercise with the general development plan. I believe Cindy Carrier reminded me earlier today that it was 4 years in the making. So this was truly a marathon event, and they didn't skip a beat. And now we're moving into the green infrastructure to focus on where do we want to protect land? How do we want to protect land moving forward? So many thanks to our staff. And then I also just want to take an opportunity. I see 47 residents on the line tonight, and about half of your names I know. And I know them because every time we are talking about smart growth, ending sprawl, protecting land, preserving our environment, you're here. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and being engaged citizens. So with all the thanks out of the way, I guess I'll talk about what I was invited to talk about. So what other tools do we have? So you've heard a lot tonight about protecting our largest contiguous tracts of open space, whether that be agricultural open space or forested open space. How do we protect those? That's mainly what the history behind the Greenways and Green Infrastructure Plan is all about. And that's what this Green Infrastructure Plan is mainly focused on. But of course, the county has a lot of other tools in our toolbox to protect different types of green infrastructure, different types of the environment. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Going to run over some of our tree canopy program information for you all. Going to touch on stormwater and restoration, though I cannot pretend to be Eric Michelson. He is the expert, and he will be here just as soon as he's done shuttling his son between soccer game and practice tonight. So can't wait to hear him answer some questions after this. And then I'm going to talk about our county laws, because there are a lot of existing laws out there that already protect a lot of the smaller green infrastructure that we have across the county. So next slide, Michael. So first off, I want to start with Replant and Arundel. Replant and Arundel is a program that we are so proud of. And we're so proud of the Watershed Steward Academy, who really got this program off the ground. I'll tell you the background. So a couple years ago, whenever we sat down and we said we want to start protecting forests, and we realized how many forests we've lost over the last decade. Between 2013 and I think it was 2018, just in a 6-year period, 2,500 acres of forest lost in Anne Arundel County. So that goes to one of the questions that one of the participants had earlier tonight. How much have we lost in the Greenway? Don't know exactly how much we've lost, but when we were looking into this, the administration realized we have lost a lot of forests, and it is time to replant Anne Arundel. So we went to a group that is used to taking small amounts of dollars, going out and getting volunteers and turning it into amazing community-driven environmental projects. And that is our Watershed Stewards Academy. And Suzanne Etkin, who you can see on the screen here, she listened to our concern. She listened to our ask of, hey, why don't we do an urban tree planting campaign? And whenever I said, Suzanne, can we replant Anne Arundel? She said, sure, you want to do 5,000 trees? Absolutely, I want to do 5,000 trees in year one. So we were excited. We had that goal of 5,000 trees in the ground for an urban tree planting program to get some of our urban tree canopy and our forest back. And then the pandemic hit, and there was no way that we were going to accomplish that. We couldn't even meet and train together other than over Zoom. But Suzanne and her team and all of you, if some of you are tree troopers or watershed stewards, you persevered last year, and we got almost 5,000 trees in the ground. And this year, we know we're going to get more than 5,000. So this is only a year old, but Replant Anne Arundel is our urban tree planting program. And I'd encourage all of you to go to this website and check it out for yourself. Next slide. Oh, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention, I also want to thank the council, because right after we started that program, the council unanimously passed a resolution saying we should have an urban tree planting program in Anne Arundel County. They didn't know it was about to come in the budget a few weeks later. So it worked out. The council and the administration were unanimously in support of urban tree planting. All right, so stormwater and restoration. And I do see that Eric Michelson has joined us, so that's good. So he can take questions on this later on. I will do my best to describe what his great shop does. But they take our stormwater fee money, the money for impervious surfaces across every zone district in the county that's collected. And they go out and they create partnerships with businesses, community groups, citizens, and they put in great stormwater restoration projects, whether it be retrofits for stormwater ponds or a stream restoration like you see on the right hand of your screen here. This is just a gorgeous project. If you're ever in the neighborhood of Furnace Creek in Glen Burnie, please go out and see this project, because it was a concrete culvert that is now converted to a meandering stream complete with habitat. And it's just a gorgeous area. And they also do stormwater outfalls and a lot of other things. And what they're responsible for really is complying with our permit, our stormwater permit from EPA and the Maryland Department of the Environment that says you need to reduce this much impervious surface or the equivalent of this much impervious surface in terms of reducing pollution to the Chesapeake Bay. And every year they take a big chunk out of that apple. And Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're at 81% of our goal already of that MS4 permit. So
yeah, we're actually satisfied the last permit, and we're making progress towards the impending new permit.
That's so great. Thank you, Eric. Next slide, please. And Eric can talk a lot more about that later if folks have questions. But that's one way that we add green infrastructure in a different way is through that program. So what about county laws? How do county laws come into play and make sure that we have open space, we have nature places, even as we are building? So I'm going to start with, of course, I'm going to start with forest conservation. Our first big environmental initiative under this administration, a couple of years back now. And the picture on the left here, I wanted to put that in this presentation because it is so indicative of what we are talking about tonight. That is up on the Marley Neck Greenway. That greenway in 2002 was part of the Greenways Master Plan, which had in it multiple recommendations for protecting the greenway. Perhaps there was one recommendation through changes to the Forest Conservation Ordinance. Those never materialized. And the Marley Neck Greenway was decimated. Hundreds and hundreds of acres of forest have been lost since 2002 because the recommendations in that 2002 plan were not followed. And this is what happens when we don't follow through with recommendations in a plan. And of course, you have competing interests that see this open space as areas they could go in and build up. So we have to balance those interests. And that's what this plan is all about, is about balancing those interests. So forest conservation, what did it do? Well, it increased the amount of forest that you have to protect on a site significantly. It increased the amount that you had to replant on that site significantly if you cut too much down. And it increased the fee in lieu. If you can't find areas to plant on that site, you pay a fee in lieu. Now, the nice thing about the fee in lieu, I know that it gets a bad rap, but we actually use that fee in lieu, turn it around for great grant projects like those the Scenic River Land Trust manages. And we end up planting forests, we end up preserving intact forests, and it's just a great program. The other thing forest conservation did, Michael alluded to this earlier, for the first time across the state, not just in Anne Arundel County, we said we are going to protect our largest intact forests. No removal of trees in our largest intact forests. Those are our 75-acre or larger forests. And so new development projects cannot disturb a 75-acre or greater in size forest in Anne Arundel County without a modification to the law. It was a huge, huge win for green infrastructure. So let's see, what else do we have? We have a whole section of the code that protects natural features. So if I could walk through the colorful, kind of shocking your eyes picture there on the right-hand side, going from left to right, the red and orange that you see kind of meandering around, those are steep slopes. You cannot build on steep slopes according to the law. So that protects that land. The very dark red in the middle, the very dark red in the middle, those are wetlands. And the light green on the sides are wetlands as well. You cannot build in a wetland or within a certain buffer of a wetland. And then on the right-hand side, you see some snake-like features there. Those are intermittent and perennial stream buffers. You cannot build within the intermittent or perennial stream buffers. So we have a whole section of the code that protects these areas, even if they are outside of the mapped green infrastructure network. I want to make sure everyone understands that. A lot of what I'm talking about is outside of the green infrastructure network. And then the last thing that I'll say is we have different manuals that the development community has to follow on new or redevelopments. Landscape manuals that say so much of your land has to be replanted in this way with these types of trees and shrubs. stormwater design manuals, which say you have to treat so much of the stormwater which falls on your land, and you have to do so with bioretention, for example, as you see on the screen here. And there are other manuals out there as well. So we have a lot of ways to add green space, to protect existing green space, even outside of the network. Next slide. Yeah, and I think that does it for me. And I'll hand it back to Michael Stringer at this point. Michael, you're on mute.
Yes, I am. Thank you. So thank you. And thank you both, Matt and Sarah, for sharing those perspectives and that information. It's great stuff. And I'd like to ask Carrie to help us facilitate as we go through questions and answers. And we've got a list of questions that folks have submitted on the Q&A. So Carrie, maybe you can pick through those and help hand those out.
I'm picking. I'm gonna go back to Matt really quick because we did get a question from Kristen Polly about the 75-acre forest. And she's asking, what does, quote, without a modification of the lot mean in the context of the 75-acre forest conservation?
Sure, you'll have to forgive me for slipping into the planning jargon there and the legal jargon there. So the law says that you cannot disturb a 75-acre or larger contiguous forest unless you get a modification. A modification is a process whereby the applicant says, listen, I've looked at the site, I've looked across it, I've done everything that I can. For these reasons, I think that you should give me a waiver to that requirement in the law. And what we've done under this administration is said, even if waivers are given for environmental laws, you have to prove, applicant, that you are going to offer up a better outcome for the environment than there was before. So let's say that you were allowed to take down trees, perhaps then you would be required to replant at 2 or 3 to 1 to improve the environment if a waiver to the law was granted. So waiver is modification.
Thanks, Matt. I'm also going to use this moment to remind people, yes, please, thank you for using the Q&A. You can continue to type questions in there. We did get several questions during the survey that I am going to pose 1 or 2 to the panel now because they're going to back us up a little bit. And I think a big one that we'd like to hear from folks on is how the Green Infrastructure Plan relates to Plan 2040, the General Development Plan, as well as the Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan that the Department of Recreation and Parks is currently putting together. I think understanding that will help us ground us for some of these other more technical questions that folks are posing. So why don't I go ahead and turn that question over to Mike or Cindy, if you want to take on the relationship between the plans.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to do that. And Cindy, you can add any color commentary if anything I miss. But so the Green Infrastructure Plan is an important piece of implementing the General Development Plan. The latest update of the General Development Plan that's in front of Council now includes several policies and strategies related to green infrastructure. If you dig in deep, there's the natural environment section of the plan. Underneath that, there's a policy 3.1 that specifically speaks to increasing the amount of protected land in the county. And it directs the county to update the 2002 Greenways Plan, to develop priorities for land acquisition, to target flood-prone properties in particular, and maybe we can ask Eric to talk about that later if that's an area of interest to the group about the county's pilot program to protect flood-prone properties. Another policy 3.2 to again supporting protection of the Greenways network and protecting corridors within that. And the Green Infrastructure Plan will inform the Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan. The Department of Recreation and Parks is currently updating. That plan addresses our, of course, need for recreation facilities, and it also talks about protection of natural lands. So the information, the analysis being conducted with the Green Infrastructure Plan will help inform that effort. And Eric or Cindy, do you want to add anything else to that? Okay. Thanks.
Well, I mean, I can just, Michael, you mentioned our acquisition of flood-prone properties program. That's a program we just rolled out on a trial basis this year, and we're in the process of selecting the property that we're going to target with that effort. It's not a ton of money, but it's basically a proof of concept. And again, the idea is really to try to identify areas where properties were built in flood-prone zones, essentially, and have had persistent problems, or identify those parcels that might be in flood-prone areas, but that are otherwise, potentially developable, and that could be taken out of the developable inventory through a mechanism like this. So trying to use sort of a carrot mechanism to get some of those properties that really shouldn't be developed out of the development envelope.
Thanks, Eric. Does anyone else want to add to that, or are we all set to move on?
I think it may be worth mentioning too that we've got after the general development plan is updated, we'll be beginning the region plans. So similar to the small area plans that were conducted in the late 90s, early 2000s, we'll be working with 9 regions around the county to prepare plans for those smaller areas. And this green infrastructure plan will be a nice policy guide for them. They'll have the information from this plan as they begin to look at and vision for the future of their communities, and think about the comprehensive rezoning that will occur within that process as well.
Great. And then, Michael, while we're on the subject of region plans and Plan 2040 still, we did get some questions from the survey also about how does green infrastructure relate to the targeted growth areas in the county, and what will be the ultimate impact on property owners who own property that is mapped in the green infrastructure network.
Yeah, those are great, important, fundamental questions. So as we said before, there's no strict regulations specifically to being located within the green infrastructure network. They would still need to comply with all the regulations that Matt briefly summarized earlier. But of course, we would also try to voluntarily work with them to see if they're going to develop the land, if they could avoid and minimize impacts to the greenway. And then, pardon me, if you can mention the second part of the question again.
Sorry.
The targeted areas. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've done analysis of the network that's in progress, and looking at it there, the large majority of the network is within our open space and rural agricultural and residential low density zoning districts. So in our predominantly in our more rural parts of the county. And conversely, in our town centers, there's hardly any at all of these large natural areas within the town centers. For those areas, when we start thinking about green infrastructure, we do start thinking about those things like street tree plantings and stormwater retrofits, but not this broader land acquisition side. There are some areas of targeted areas that are identified in the general development plan, such as around BWI Airport, that's identified as a critical economic area in the plan, where there's a lot of streams and wetlands, and as well as land that's identified for industrial uses. So the green infrastructure plan does map those resources that are on the ground today, even though some of that land is within some of those targeted areas. And that'll be something to be reconciled with as through the development review process, as projects specifically come in on those properties, as well as something for communities to look at in the region plans.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the conversation now for touching on the implementation side more of things, because we have been getting questions about that from the survey as well as from folks in the Q&A tonight who are asking tough, long questions, and a lot of them center on implementation. We do have a question from a representative from Senator Chris Van Hollen's office who would like to know whether the county has considered what the influence of the network will be on our adjacent counties. Are we in partnership with them, and how do we anticipate sort of the impact of our kind of collective effort? And I think that's a question that anybody on the panel is equipped to answer. So I will just invite anyone who'd like to take that question.
Sure. So I'll tackle that one. First off, welcome. Thank you. I don't know if you're in Washington tonight, but we really appreciate you stopping in. And secondly, I'd say that we are not the only county. All the counties across Maryland do a Greenways green infrastructure plan like this. In fact, whenever we were developing our map and I was working with the staff, I was looking quite a bit at our neighboring county, Howard County, to see how they mapped out their interior forests and kind of designed their forest conservation ordinance to protect their interior forests. So I think that all of the counties are doing this. Certainly at the county level, we are trying to plan comprehensively for the growth that we think will occur in our county, balancing that with the preservation and conservation we'd like to see. But I will say that the administration, County Executive Stuart Pittman, has been adamant that it is time that we break out of our county by county silos and start talking about ourselves as a region. With the city of Baltimore needing redevelopment to be thrown its way, and the suburban counties begging for an end to sprawl and a different way to do growth smarter. So I think that what you're going to see as counties like ours and Howard and others develop these green infrastructure plans, develop these comprehensive plans, you're going to see us get together more and more with the Baltimore and Washington region and start to say, how do we as a region plan moving forward? And I hope that those conversations continue.
Great, thanks, Matt. We're getting a couple of questions from folks who are asking us basically how specific we can get with our policies in the plan as the implementation progresses. So we got a question from Bob and Janelle in France about whether the county is considering disallowing impervious residential driveways. We have a question from Bernie Robinson about the application of pesticides and fertilizers and basically some land management and urban design management questions. So I guess what I'd like to know from the panel is, how do we see the green infrastructure plan in partnership with the other plans and policies that have been discussed, kind of taking on some of these more implementation focused questions about, let's say, urban and suburban forms. So I don't know if somebody who's equipped for that one, but I'm going to go ahead and say it's, let's try Mike or Matt again, maybe Cindy.
Don't everybody take it at once. Cindy, you've been at this for quite a while. Can you speak to kind of all the policies that are in the GDP and all the policy goals that might be in this document and how they eventually become law or not?
So some of them are not law, but we'll work through them. In Plan 2040, we have an implementation schedule that identifies short, medium, and long-term goals over the 20-year planning horizon, and we'll start working through implementing all of the strategies. It's not all OPZ. We have many county departments who we partner with to help implement the strategies. And some of those, as Mike mentioned earlier, are strategies related to the green infrastructure plan. And one of them is updating the plan and getting that adopted. And then the green infrastructure plan itself will have additional recommendations to carry forward, implementing and protecting the Greenways plan. Trying to think, I know there's one about herbicide. That was one of our strategies. That would be a separate strategy from Plan 2040 that we would evaluate. I don't see that being part of the green infrastructure plan, but it's a separate strategy as part of Plan 2040.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. And I'll just add to that, impervious surface was also asked. That also is a strategy that the council agreed to in Plan 2040, that we will review options for reducing impervious surface.
Right.
Matt, this is Eric. Just there was a question about using or getting rid of pervious driveways. And I would just say that in terms of new development activities, the opportunity to do some kind of pervious surface, like pavers or a porous concrete to effectively reduce the impervious surface is an option for residential or commercial builders at this point. They may or may not take advantage of it based on the cost considerations for their site, but it is on the table, and it's being used more and more frequently, especially for properties within the critical area.
Thanks, Eric. So I'm going to kind of pivot to a different subject here. We're going to go from sort of how this plan is operationalized to what happens when land is not included in the plan. We have an excellent question from Marcia Perry, who would like to, Sarah, I'm going to throw this question to you, who would like to sort of understand the advantages and limitations of a community created conservation easement, perhaps with help from Scenic Rivers Land Trust. How do communities go about purchasing land in their community that maybe doesn't fit with the size or location model that the county is using for its green infrastructure network?
I would love to talk to that person about how they want to protect land. So that, there are some, it's hard to generally speak to, what exactly the limitations would be for a specific property. Just some general things. Usually Scenic Rivers doesn't work to put a conservation easement on a property that's less than 10 acres, unless it's really special, like there's rare, threatened, or endangered species on it, or there's a public access component, or it's right next to other protected land, so it's kind of adding to a bigger property. And I think the rest of that, I think I would just love for them to reach out to me by email or by phone. I'd be happy to put that up somewhere. I think if there's a variety of programs that can help them purchase that, and that I would be happy to talk to them, but it's so hard to speak in general terms about this kind of thing.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to speak slightly out of turn here and maybe address one of these tree planting questions, because to support what you're saying, Sarah, we met with the Watershed Stewards Academy last week and had a great meeting with them about Replant and Arundel. And that's not, a community land trust program, but that is a community volunteer powered program. So if you do have volunteers and your community has interest in kind of improving its green footprint, let's say, reach out to Water Stewards Academy and see if maybe you guys can get involved in the Replant program, because that could be something that comes to your neighborhood as well. And let's see about other questions here. I appreciate everybody for sending us questions. Just know that if we don't get to your question, it's definitely recorded and we'll either answer it via email to you or post it on our website under our FAQ. We are getting several questions from folks about how this plan interacts maybe with our coastal resiliency work. Specifically, is the Coast Smart Climate Ready Action Boundary Model being referenced in the county's green infrastructure and general development plan? That's one question. And then we also have another question, just kind of wondering whether the green infrastructure plan relates to our efforts to improve waterways in the Bay. So those are two sort of water-based questions. Does anyone on our panel feel like that is their expertise area? Or is that something we should follow up with folks on?
Carrie, I'm happy to respond to the second piece of that, and maybe Matt or I could respond to the first piece too.
Great.
But on the second piece, I think this element of identifying the greenways, identifying natural resource areas in the county is critical to basically holding the line on minimizing future degradation. A lot of the work that our bureau is focused on is correcting the sins of the past, if you will. And so it would be really nice not to be committing new sins while we're correcting the sins of the past. And I think that having resources like this allows the land use agencies really to be really active partners in protecting and potentially additionally protecting resources that are very sensitive and critical to protecting water quality. So as Matt showed, on Marley Neck, those resources were identified 10 years ago or more, and we didn't necessarily take the steps to put the protections in place. But hopefully, we can use this document really to inform development going forward and to minimize, the issues that we're facing, as well as target opportunities for restoration or replanting and that sort of thing as well.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Eric. And I'll take the first part of the question, which related to climate and sea level rise modeling. I don't believe, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that a sea level rise model itself was used to create the map.
We referenced models that exist from the DNR and from the county's 2011 sea level rise analysis. So we've looked at data and we've included those areas that are susceptible to sea level rise when they meet those other criteria of being of that large size and connected. So yes.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So see, I'm learning with you folks. This is great that we did use that data. I will say we're also using that data in different ways. The Plan 2040 General Development Plan for the first time shows residents Maryland State Highway Administration's best estimate for where the sea level is going to rise and how high. Basically shows you where the floodplain is going to move by 2050 and by 2100. And it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call for a lot of communities along the coast and for all of us who do this work. And so I gotta do a shameless plug here. We just introduced a bill to create a resilience authority for Anne Arundel County and the city of Annapolis. And what that authority is being created to do is to tackle more than $200 million in backlog projects to raise road elevations and bridges out of the current floodplain, not even addressing the future floodplain, but out of the current floodplain. Also to tackle large community flood control projects that we know we're going to need to combat sea level rise. And in all of our discussions with the county council, we have been using those sea level rise maps that are in Plan 2040 to say this is coming. It's time for us to create the innovative financing authority that can go out and do this very quickly, cut through red tape, and work with communities to protect them moving forward.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Let's see here. I did want to go back to a question. I'm sorry if this is hopping all over the place, but your guys' questions are I'm trying to discern the pattern here. So let's go through. We did get a question from several people about what this map means for regional plans. We have one question specifically about whether communities will be able to advocate for additional green space during the region plan process. And we have a related question that's a bit more general, just about how we will be including green infrastructure in that process more generally, as well as I'm guessing a subtext of that is also other sort of land conservation controls. So if Mike, why don't I go ahead and throw that to you and you can drag anyone into it if you wish.
Yeah, I'll say a bit, and then I'd like to ask Cindy to comment as well. Because she's got so much experience too from the small area plan process in the past, and the region plans will do some things that occurred there as well. I would say that yes, as the community comes together around developing region plans, certainly thinking about natural resources in the environment is going to be a key element of those plans. And while the green infrastructural map will be a nice base map for them to look at, they will certainly have the opportunity to look at and identify other areas that are important to them for protection. And certainly, maybe Cindy, you can speak to a bit of the kind of work that happened with that in the small area plans, or how you might see that rolling out with the region plans upcoming.
Yeah, so it'll be different. In the small area plan process, we didn't have Greenways master plan adopted. And so communities were giving us feedback for where they thought the greenways were. We've basically mapped that. Now, certainly if people want to bring forward areas, we'll take a look, see if they meet the criteria. But another part of region plan is also refining within our land use. We're Monday, will have adopted conservation and open space land use. And what we didn't do was include homeowner open space within that. And that's one of the things we would like to do, is encourage more communities to, further protect their areas. Some communities have land that they own that could be developed. It's not necessarily set aside for recreation or some other component in their neighborhood. So we would encourage them to either put that into conservation or open space.
Yeah, and if I could jump in there at the very end and say, through the general development plan process, there was a robust conversation at the council about how does the land use map that's in front of that council relate to the land use map that will be generated by these advisory committees and the council again for each region. And then how does that second land use map relate to comprehensive rezoning? And it is a cyclical process. So we have a land use map right now, or we will after Monday. And then we have this wonderful area of preservation, as you all will see in the region plan process from this plan. And those two things, the key is every community should look at those two things. Here's the land use map. Here's the areas that are slated for preservation. Do we as a community agree with both of them? Where are they in conflict? Where are they not? And do we want to keep it that way? And that will inform the county council's decisions on how to comprehensively rezone the land after this whole cycle is over. So yes, the green infrastructure plan map is very important for the resulting comprehensive rezoning, and your input in that process is very important as well.
Great, thank you. I think that answers a couple of recent questions that we got. Sorry, I'm reading them as they come in, so thanks everyone for your patience. I'm going to turn to a question that we got from the survey that we hope that everybody who is listening this evening will take the opportunity to respond to. It's only 6 or 7 questions. It'll take you about 5 minutes, and that's on our website at aacounty.org/green-infrastructure. We did get several questions on that survey related to how the green infrastructure plan poses or is proposed to address equity in the county. And one of the questions that we got specifically was in regard to our question in the survey about protecting fewer bigger properties or many smaller properties. And I'm going to go ahead and ask maybe Eric and Mike and maybe Erica too, if she'd like to think about this question of how green infrastructure, how we're proposing to kind of balance the investments in access to outdoors across the county, and the benefits of the different types of conservation that are available to us. So Mike, why don't you go ahead first with that first?
I'll start with an invitation to Erica to speak to this, of that our Recreation Parks program manages a lot of different kinds of facilities, and from some of the largest areas in the county to smaller neighborhood parks that provide those kind of amenities close to home. And it's within that suite of looking at those different opportunities, as well as the needs analysis that they do in the Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan, that I think a lot of that analysis and discussion will occur.
Good evening. So under the Land Preservation Plan, it also includes natural areas as well as agriculture. So we sort of take it from 2 approaches. We look at partnerships with agencies such as SARA's, private owners, federal grants, and how we secure the funding. Our goal is to always provide some sort of recreational amenity attached to the open spaces that we acquire. It may be small areas, such as Michael said, where it's just a sort of, it almost looks like a little neighborhood park, but there may be access to water. You just have to sort of park, get off, and you can go and enjoy the water. And then we have some of the bigger areas, such as like Quiet Waters Park, where there's a small isolated area of development, but a majority of the park remains in conservation, similar to Beverly Triton, where with the new development, I think we developed maybe 6 or 7 out of 300 acres. So it's always a little bit of a balance in what it is that we try to do. When properties come to us for evaluation, we do look at them for conservation as well as for recreational needs. And the LPPRP will have a goal in there for us to acquire so many additional acres. So we're coming at it from a lot of different approaches here.
Thanks, Erica. We got an interesting question about, I think from a couple of people actually wondering this on different levels, which is how we can get better buy-in to support green infrastructure throughout the county. I also feel like this question was embedded in the gentleman's question early on who asked us about how we're going to strengthen our public engagement. So I'd like to invite Erica, if you wouldn't mind following up on that question about buy-in, since I think Rec and Park does a great job of connecting with citizens. And then maybe Mike or Cindy can follow up with how we're planning to sort of, toot the green infrastructure horn as we kind of carry this plan forward.
Okay, so I'll start with after we sort of acquired the land. Typically, once we acquire the land, if there are no set conservation easements attached and we sort of have free reign over the property, we have a very robust public engagement process. And it typically starts with us doing a master plan for the park. And at that time, the community is more than welcome to come out and express their needs for the park. We try to integrate the park amenities to the natural landscape that's out there. Our goal is to always have a very soft and delicate and sort of a very intentional touch. Sometimes when we get into the development stage, instead of us putting down, say, a paved or a more robust type of a trail, we'll do boardwalks to maintain wetlands in certain areas. So it's a little bit of give and take. We also follow the same development rules as the other developers in the county. So the same forest conservation rules that Matt has spoken to, we follow those. So again, that's another reason why we try to be very gentle and deliberate with the development.
And actually, for building public, if I could add on, for building public support, I'll take one aspect of that, it's been, of course, a challenge for the planning department in the last year of how do we engage the public through the pandemic. So you're seeing us pivot to tools like this, like going online. And we'll share with you that we'll be developing a mapping application too, that you can really dive deep into the details of this map and be able to comment on it. And we'll have that rolled out probably in a month or so's time after we get that all worked out. And it's something that we've been focusing a lot of energy and thought on, especially as we get into the region plans, to make sure that we can broadly engage the public to have a really constructive conversation about our future, and recognizing that there's a lot of diverse opinions and different perspectives in our communities and how we try to come together to shared vision of the future. And maybe I'd like to ask Sarah or Matt to comment as well about that kind of piece about like the building support, right? Sarah's in the nonprofit space. You're always having to try to rally people to give the funding to do the good work.
Well, sure. So yeah, I mean, I think this includes a lot of public outreach and events and mailers and having forums like this where, just bringing this plan forward more often, bringing, for scenic rivers, our priorities like the South River Greenway is a huge focus area for us. And further protecting Bacon Ridge and outdoor area, which has been a long time project of ours. So, working with the community and finding these community leaders, I think is a really strong way to get the rest of the community involved. So it's really getting on the ground and finding who those engaged partners are and trying to spread the word that way.
Yeah, and if I could just add on again, I'm sorry, I'm going to do a shameless plug, but I am. If those of you on the phone are already engaged and do believe in green infrastructure, pay attention tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. because, and I shouldn't say this, the comms director won't like me, but I think you're going to see quite a few more dollars for green infrastructure, greenways, forests, protection in this year's county executive's budget. So we're really excited about that. Tune in at 11 a.m. And then contact your council member if you support it.
All right, I'm going to thank the panelists. I did not give you a 2-question warning, but I think that that was a good question to end on. To those attendees who felt that their questions were not addressed tonight, I did skip over some of the more technical ones so that we could be sure to continue to engage everybody who's on the call. So I have written down your questions. We have your email registration. We will follow up with you. You may also please send us an email at greenplan@aacounty.org, and you can connect with us directly that way. We're going to go ahead and move on to our final slide of the evening, which is outlining what the next steps are for this plan and this process. But again, thank you to our panelists for their partnership on this plan and for letting me put them through the ringer, even though I am extremely junior to everybody who is on here tonight. So thank you for taking all the questions.
You did a great job, Carrie. I really appreciate it. So for next steps, where we go from here. As Carrie has mentioned, we've got our online survey that we'd love to get more participation in. And then there'll be some more substantive ways for you to give input into the planning process as we move forward. I mentioned that we're developing an online map application, and that'll be coming out hopefully in the next month. And that will allow you to zoom into your neighborhood and see which areas are included and not, and be able to drop comments in to say whether you love it, whether you want to see something added to it or something removed from that network map. And then we'll also be preparing the draft plan for public review. That'll include both the draft map as well as then those recommendations that Cindy mentioned earlier for implementation of the plan. So that'll be coming out in the summer. Then in the fall, we'll get into that formal review process with the Planning Advisory Board and eventually County Council. So you see the website there listed at the bottom of the screen, and please check that out and email us at greenplan@aacounty.org, and we'll make sure that we get you on the distribution list so that as these milestones come up, we can keep you in the loop. And we're also trying to, we're a little bit behind the times in some of our social media things. We're trying to get messages out through the different Facebook pages from our partner departments like Recreation and Parks and Bureau of Watersheds, as well as external partners like Scenic River Land Trust and Watershed Stewards Academy. And if you see our stuff, please like it, share it. The more we can get out, the more representative and broad input we can get, the stronger the plan will be. So with that, thank you again, everybody, for taking the time to be with us this evening. We look forward to continuing to engage with you throughout this process and really appreciate the public commitment to both this planning process and to participating in local county government. This is how we shape our future. Thank you again to all the panelists as well.